Hi, I'm Andy from Genelec and welcome to this video and a whole new series to support the launch of GLM. And a number of my colleagues will be kind of sharing insights and some quite kind of deep dives into GLM as a platform. So GLM is our Genelec loudspeaker management system, which complements our smart active monitors to allow you to optimize, control your sound systems, be that in your studio, home environment, wherever you may be using them. And this series of videos will kind of give you all of the information that you need to get the most out of your sound systems. So in this first video, I'd like to take you into a deep dive of the foundations of a professional monitoring system. What elements we should look for to be able to support our monitoring system to get the very best out of it in a real world environment. So we're going to be looking at the basics of audio monitoring, the workflow and the applications, key requirements for a professional monitoring system, room and loudspeaker interaction, monitor placement guidelines, the purpose of acoustic calibration, and acoustical adjustments, whether they be manual or fully automated, and in this case with GLM. The basics of audio monitoring, workflow and applications. So at Genelec, we make reference monitors for audio. We don't produce monitors for a specific genre of music or a specific application. We provide tools that allow you to monitor audio and make critical decisions. So whether that be in music, post-production, broadcast, gaming, hi-fi, or even in research, you'll find Genelec monitors in all of these different applications. But our ultimate goal is to reproduce neutral audio. So when we're talking about an audio system and audio monitoring, we can look at the signal flow. So a basic signal flow that we would expect would be an audio source, which would then feed an audio interface, a converter, and then it would then hit our monitoring system. The key requirements for a professional monitoring system. So some reasonable expectations that we could make regarding an audio system in a professional context: that it would be bulletproof, that it would work every single day as you come into the room, that you would receive neutral audio reproduction, and will give you precise information both on and off axis, that the system will be able to reproduce sufficient frequency response in SPL, and when needed can adapt to the environment. So a significant expectation from a professional system would that it would be built for a long life, that whenever you walk into a room and you're ready to work, the system is there ready to go. If we look at the image on the right, that's from Metropolis Studio B in London, and that room has an enormous turnover of artists, producers, engineers that go through that room, and the systems in there are played at incredibly high SPLs. They're punished, to be honest. So day in, day out, we need to be confident that those systems can run at high SPL, and that when creatives walk in there in the morning, that they are ready to go. And our monitors have stood the test of time in many, many different applications, be that music, broadcast, post-production, you name it. We can expect a long, long life from our Genelec monitors. Sustainability is a core design principle and is a core pillar of Genelec as a business. So even going back to the early incarnations of Genelec monitors, sustainability and long life were key elements. So we want to ensure that not only do our products last for an incredibly long time, that we can ensure that our carbon footprint is incredibly low. Wherever possible, we're using recycled materials, and we try and use as little power as possible. So we're always trying to refine our processes to find amplifiers that consume less power, and that we can ensure a long life for our products. We're trusted in the most demanding situations. So we'll be the NQC point for many, many broadcasters. We use day in, day out in post-production facilities, people creating content, who are mixing, editing, and they'll be rolled out on a huge scale across many, many rooms across the department. It will be found in education. So again, numerous monitors will be deployed across campuses. So we're trusted in many, many different areas. So kind of coming back to that bulletproof operation and that long life, kind of two pillars of what we do. In the vast majority of our products now, we employ intelligent signal sensing so that when our products aren't being used, they can go to sleep and again consume a negligible amount of energy. So in a lot of cases, less than 0.5 of a watt. Very useful for kind of smaller systems, but when this is kind of rolled out over larger facilities where we're talking about hundreds of loudspeakers, there's a significant element to cooling and powering systems, that the lower amount of energy that we can use, the better it is for the customer, for the facility, and ultimately the environment. And then finally, we offer a 5-year warranty on our products, so we expect long life and continued service from our products. For many, many years, we've seen service requests from monitors that have been in the field for 15, 20, 25 years. So it's reasonable to expect from a Genelec product that you can use it for many, many years, but also it can be serviced. So in its 10th year and its 15th year, we can still support those products. So ensuring that our monitors have a sustained period of time in operation, and that you're not having to change monitors every few years. Another key principle that we believe a professional monitoring system should have is the ability to reproduce audio and reproduce neutral audio, regardless of the environment. One of the design goals at Genelec is to produce and design a flat frequency response. That's all well and good in controlled anechoic conditions at the factory, but what happens when you take that same loudspeaker and you place it within a room? We want to ensure that our reference monitors can adapt to less than ideal environments. Once you place a loudspeaker in a room, the room interaction is going to play a significant part on the performance of that monitor. So once the design limitations within a room are met, we need tools to be able to adapt that monitor to its environment. And a way that we try and achieve that, through proper placement, and then secondly, we use our onboard calibration tools to be able to neutralize the frequency response within that room. The goal is to help you get back to a neutral reference. And these are very, very powerful tools if they are used. I speak to a number of customers and ask them, have you calibrated your system? Have you kind of taken the time to see what the frequency response looks like? Have you been able to kind of neutralize some of the kind of the in-room influences? And they might look at you a little bit sheepishly and say, oh no, I haven't. So what we try and do at Genelec is to guide our customers and encourage them to calibrate their systems. So if we look on the right hand side, we can see the frequency response of a Genelec S360 in anechoic conditions. So this is measured at the factory. And then below, we can kind of see the in-room response of that monitor. So the red plot there is the in-room response. And what we've been able to do with our calibration techniques, and in this case, within GLM, is to kind of reduce some of those room influences. So what we've been able to do is to get that monitor to behave in a much more consistent manner, akin to how it was designed in that anechoic environment. So we can see from the frequency response that we've got some boundary loading in the low frequencies, but we've also got an increase in energy from desktop reflections. So the ability to be able to counteract that with GLM means that we can get much closer to a neutral frequency response. Another key consideration would be precision of the frequency response on axis, but also off axis. If we can ensure a flat on and off axis response, we give ourselves a much wider listening area. when we're working with systems that don't offer a neutral response off axis, it feels like you're really shackled to the listening position, and it can be very difficult as you move off axis, because the sound character and the sound color of the system changes drastically. One way we ensure this is through controlled directivity. So we'll see a kind of a shaped waveguide on our monitors, and what we've got the ability to do is to deliver more direct sound versus reflected sound to the listening position. Another byproduct of this is the ability to offer a stable stereo image with a defined phantom center. So central images such as kick drums and vocals remain very defined, and then as you start to kind of move left and right in that stereo image, it remains stable. A fantastic example of this is with our Wands family of loudspeakers. They have an incredibly generous waveguide, and the directivity control is absolutely rock solid. In other applications, such as immersive, where we're panning through lots of different monitors, this can give us an incredibly precise panning information. So if we're panning an object between monitors, it will give us the ability to assess the size of an object, its location between the monitors, rather than just experiencing audio being panned from monitor to monitor. Another consideration would be ensuring that a monitoring system can reproduce a sufficient amount of SPL as well as low frequency extension. So we have a number of resources available on our website to allow customers to assess how low they need a monitoring system to play, and also how loud they need it to play. An example of this, if we're working in an immersive format where we may want to hit a certain SPL at a certain distance, we can use this chart on the left to kind of correctly specify a monitoring system given a specific listening distance. So if we're working in an incredibly near field environment, kind of less than a meter, we could see something like an 80-10, up to an 80-30 would be ideal for that application. But if we needed to throw a greater distance, say we needed to hit 85 dB SPL at 1.5 meters or 2 meters, we may be looking at a slightly larger monitor, something like our 8340, 8350. So all of these SPL requirements are all documented on our website, and also within our monitor setup guide, which is available, which is an incredibly useful guide to assist with you choosing the correct monitor for your room. One element that we look for in a professional environment is the ability to adapt to the space, and one consideration could be down to placement. In this room, for example, there was the need to position the center speaker in front of the left and right. This was to ensure that there still remained sight lines to the voiceover booth. So what we needed to be able to do was to be able to delay the center speaker so that it was then in line with the left and right. So the ability to be able to compensate for less than ideal placement to ensure that a room can still work, that the layout of the room is convenient for the customer, is a huge advantage. Sometimes we will kind of be constrained by the layout of the room, so we need to look at other techniques to be able to allow us to be able to ensure that the system is optimized for that space. So tools like GLM are hugely important for that. Room and loudspeaker interaction. An incredibly common phenomenon that we see whenever we place a loudspeaker in a room is boundary loading. So this is the issue of placing a loudspeaker next to a wall or in a corner, and the byproduct of that is we'll generally see issues with the mix translating, specifically in the low frequencies. We may experience a lack of definition in the low end, so kick drums becoming a little bit wallowy, bass guitars starting to tumble over each other. This may also lead to masking of the mid-range, so vocal information becomes clouded, and also lack of clarity with ambient effects and delay trails. So if we have a loudspeaker standing in free space, so with no boundaries around it, we can expect a much flatter frequency response. As we start to place the loudspeaker against a wall, we will generally see a boost in the low end of around about 6 decibels. With 2 boundaries behind it, you'll generally see a 12 dB boost. And if it's right in a corner, you'll see a boost of 18 dB. So the kind of the net result of this is that you're often having to guess how your low frequency information is going to translate to other systems. Another issue that we see all the time with many systems is desktop or console reflections. So it's generally a coloration of the vocal range, which affects intelligibility of speech. Extra body in a voiceover. So what you may find is you'll get this kind of chest cavity boom within a voiceover. By the time you've EQ'd that dialogue can start to sound a little bit insipid and a little bit thin. And when you deliver that, it can be a little bit of a letdown. So what we often find, this is an issue within broadcast and post-production applications. So we can see here on this frequency response, some of the console reflections, and they will typically be seen at around about 100 Hertz up to around about 250. And one of the ways that we can reduce that is to raise the monitor up further up off the desktop, or we kind of look to kind of reduce some of that energy either with onboard filters or in this case via GLM. Another key foundation to achieving neutral audio reproduction is to be able to understand and counteract issues with reflections. So if we're in a room that's quite reverberant with a lot of flat surfaces, then we may experience an increase of reflected over direct sound. The result of that will be lack of instrument definition, difficulty in perceiving ambience, so a difficulty in being able to understand how much reverb to add to a source. This can also lead to a vague stereo image and a soft phantom center. So a way that we can combat this is to add absorbent panels around the listening position. So a common approach to this would be to look to add absorbent materials to the left and right, immediately either side of the listening position, to add a cloud overhead, and just start to reduce those early reflections that are coming back into the listening position. This is something that's very, very easy to do, and can be the amount of absorption can be increased over time and kind of gradually used to tame those reflections down so that you experience a much more direct relationship between yourself and your monitoring. Another way which we can mitigate the effects of reflections is to use some diffusion to essentially scatter some of those reflections so they're not coming back into the listening position. It's possible to go too far with absorption so that we have a room that's really, really dead and feels quite uncomfortable to be in. So what we'll often find is rooms that will have a combination of absorption and diffusion to ensure that reflections are kind of kept under control whilst the room still remains pleasant to be in. Monitor placement guidelines. The foundation of any monitoring system is in the placement. So if we can place our monitor and give it the best chance of having a more neutral reproduction, it means that the work that we do on the calibration side is either much quicker, or that we're having to do less to the system to ensure a neutral reproduction. So beginning with the monitor height, we should aim for a height of around about 1.2 meters. This can reduce floor reflections, but one of the key goals here is to try and get the monitoring towards our ear height. If it's a larger monitoring system, we may need to mount those higher and angle them down, just to kind of keep desktop reflections to a minimum, or just to try and get a direct path between the listening position and the main monitors, and reduce any obstruction from computer monitors, for example. If we're working on a desktop, it's often a good idea to be able to raise the monitors up. Again, typically trying to get the acoustic axis towards the ear height. One key consideration is understanding where the acoustic axis lives on a particular monitor. So with our three-way ones family, it's super straightforward. Our ideal positioning will be to get the tweeter in line with our ear. Because the tweeter and the mid-range coaxial driver work together, we're experiencing a point source system, so the audio is able to be delivered direct to the ear if the monitor is placed at ear height. With our two-way products, because we're dealing with two separate drivers, we've got a tweeter and a woofer that exist on a slightly different plane. It takes a certain amount of distance for them to align. So we have to take into consideration the alignment distance for our two-way products. So loudspeaker positions in the vertical axis. All loudspeakers ideally should be at the same height. If we're talking about the kind of the hemispherical placement of an immersive system, the LCR, the sides and the rears ideally should be at the same height. If you have to go slightly above, then I would look at angling those monitors down towards the listening position, but if at all possible, no greater than 15 degrees. Anything greater than that and you start to experience a sensation of height, and this can be kind of confusing, especially if you have height elements in a system. We have a number of mounting options to assist you with this, whether it's mounting options for the desktop, floor stands, ceiling mounts, to be able to get those monitors within that window of that 15 degrees. But ideally, if you can position them at ear height between 1.2 meters and 1.4 meters, it's a really, really good starting point. A consideration relating to listening distances versus our two-way products versus our ones products. So with our point source monitors, our ones family, if we look at 8331 on the right-hand graph, 8341, 8351 and 8361, you can see that the listening distance, or the minimum listening distance, is pretty much negated. You can sit incredibly close to those monitors because of the coaxial nature of that design. All of the information will hit you at once. So whether you're working at 5 meters or less than a meter, you will experience the sound hitting you at the same time. When we're looking at a two-way product, because the two drivers, the tweeter and the woofer, are positioned on a slightly different plane, there is a certain distance in which they align. So if we look at something like our 8340, ideally we wouldn't want to look at a distance any shorter than 0.6 of a meter. As we get into our larger three-way products, you can see that the listening distance is much greater because there's more SPL, but also that minimum listening distance is increased as well. Because we've got multiple drivers existing in a different space, it takes a certain amount of time for them to align. So listening distance, or minimum listening distance, does vary depending on the model. So a number of examples that are available in terms of ideal placement within the room exist within our monitor setup guide, which is available in the link below in the description. You can also head over to genelec.com and download a version of that for yourself. There's a huge amount of information in there which assists with correct placement. And again, this is the foundation of a well-calibrated system. The calibration techniques will get you so far to a point, but I would say the key foundation of any good monitoring system is in the placement and its relationship within the room. So in a typical rectangular room, we would optimize, or we kind of identify the optimum listening position. So we would try and aim for the front third of the room. The reason being is if we position ourselves towards the back wall, we'll experience a lot of build-up in the low end. If we position ourselves in the middle of the room, we may expose ourselves to be able to be sitting in a null. So we may be sitting in an area of the room where the system isn't able to reproduce certain frequencies. If we position ourselves in the front third of the room, it gives us the best chance of achieving a neutral frequency response. We try and look for the room orientation that offers the best left-right symmetry. So ensuring that we don't have a huge amount of space on either side of the monitoring system. For stereo application, we'd look to try and position the system at 60 degrees, so towing the monitors in towards the listening position. And finally, ensuring that listening distance to both monitors is the same, so that both monitors are essentially the same distance from the listening position. It's very easy to do. It's kind of setting up a microphone stand in the listening position and then taking a tape measure and just measuring out that distance. Taking that time to get those two distances right can make an enormous difference in the quality of the stereo image, and also the kind of sense of realism from the audio system. Ideally, we would look to avoid listening positions that are closer from 1 meter from a wall. This just reduces the number of early reflections into the listening position. If you can give yourself a little bit of distance between yourself and the side of the room, you kind of feel that you've got much more of a connection to the left and right monitors. We try and position our mix position along the central axis of the room. And also try and move away from any reflective surfaces. So any unnecessary screens, kind of flat surfaces. If you can kind of break that up with some absorption or even some additional equipment on there just to kind of break up those early reflections into the mix position, that can make a significant difference. We check the distance from the monitors to the nearest sidewalls is the same. So again, ensuring that we're not set up in an L-shaped room where the left-hand monitor has 2 meters of space to one side and the right-hand monitor is right against a wall. Just trying to look for balance and symmetry. Ultimately, if there are effects on one monitor, we want to try and replicate that on the other. And the easiest way to do that is to try and find symmetrical placement within the room. And finally, you can consult any of the guides on our website relating to monitoring distance, just to ensure that you've got enough headroom and horsepower in the monitor for whichever task that you need. So say, for example, you need to reproduce a certain amount of SPL at a certain distance, you can use those guides to ensure that you're choosing the correct monitor for that application. A phenomenon which is incredibly common but isn't often spoke about is rear wall cancellations or quarter wavelength cancellations. So ideally, I would look to place a monitor no less than 0.6 of a meter from a rear wall. This ensures that the bass output level is not reduced due to comb filtering generated by rear wall cancellations. So what does that mean? As you start to bring a monitor into the room, the lower mid frequencies will start to diffract around the monitor, hit the rear wall, and then bounce back towards the monitor. And at some point, those frequencies will be out of phase with what the monitor is reproducing. An example of that is if you place monitors on a meter bridge and there is a distance behind the monitor of about a meter or so, you will generally see a cancellation in the lower mid range. In a music context, it means that the snare drum loses a huge amount of energy, and that sense of an inertia in a groove can be greatly reduced. So one thing that we can do is to start to push the monitor up against the wall. One thing that we will see is a boost in the low end, but that can be easily reduced through calibration, either by onboard filters or by using GLM. This right-hand graphic here will show the effects of moving a monitor closer to the wall. So we can see here at 4 meters, the cancellations are incredibly low in the frequency response. But as we start to move closer to the rear boundary, they start to move up and they start to be much more disruptive in musical parts of the frequency response. So as we get to 1.5 meters, we start to reduce the energy in our kick drum. As we move to a meter, you can see it starting to creep towards 100 hertz. And like I say, that can start to remove really important parts of musical information. Snare drums, information in guitars, body in vocals. And it can be really difficult to be able to second guess how to replace that energy. You can often end up overcooking it a little bit when it comes to a mix, again, causing issues in the translation to other systems. So by placing the monitor hard up against the wall, you will reduce some of these quarter wavelength issues. Yes, you'll introduce some more boundary loading, but that's very easy to take care of, either on the calibration side or by adding additional subwoofers to be able to take care of some of that load from the system. The purpose of acoustical calibration. So if we were looking for our calibration goals, it would be obviously to improve the translation of our mixes, improve the likelihood that any decisions that we make in a mix context will translate to other systems. We want to reduce the influence of the room. We may need to compensate for compromised placement. That could be in the level or time domain because we've had to place a monitor slightly closer than another monitor in the system. We may want to optimize the system performance as a whole. So say, for example, we have an overall color of a system and we want to be able to adjust that globally. We may want to make a system slightly darker or slightly brighter. We might want to do that on a system-wide scale. My ultimate goal while I'm calibrating a system is to try and make the monitor disappear. I don't want to be aware that I'm listening to a loudspeaker. All I want to hear is an image, and I want to be immersed by that image, whether it's stereo or whether it's a larger immersive system. By reducing reflections in the listening position, by neutralizing the frequency response, you can get much, much closer to this effect of just experiencing an audio image and having that speaker disappear. Acoustical adjustments from manual to fully automated. So we have two main tools at our disposal. We've got room response controls, which live on the back of our classic series monitors. And in our SAM range, we've got automatic calibration via GLM. So if we employ analog filters, we've got the ability to adjust the response to compensate from the room's influences on a fairly broad scale. So our goal with this is to retrieve a flat frequency response at the listening position. To get the best out of these analog filters, we would require some external measurement systems, or at the very least some reference material to be able to compare and contrast between the effects of those filters. One technique that we can employ without any additional equipment is the use of reference material. So we can choose a handful of high quality tracks that we kind of know really well, that we know are well recorded, get to know them really, really well, and then listen for obvious cues. So does the low end seem out of control? Does the vocal seem cloudy? One thing I go to every time I set up a system is I check that the left and right is in the correct order. That can have a huge impact. It has a massive impact on your stereo image. What you can then do is adjust the monitor, adjust the height, adjust the dip switches, and then listen. And then you go back and forth in that process and try and do it as quickly as possible to try and get to a point where you've improved the system. It's good to have a checklist. So personally for me, I like to go through and check that the left and right is the right way around. Check that the gain structure throughout the system is correct. Make sure I'm not clipping converters. Is there any noise in the system? And chase that back through the signal flow. Cues like a vocal sounding cloudy, or like the vocalist has a cold, that may be down to desktop reflections or the speakers being positioned kind of quite close to the desktop. How solid is the phantom center? That can having a vague phantom center can be an issue with improper placement or a level mismatch between the monitors. Also, level mismatches can be down to the aiming, so our imaging may seem vague. And that can also be a level issue too. And also the realism. Is there too much coloration in the system? And now is that down to boundary loading? Is that down to a specific EQ towards a certain monitor? Or it could be in the placement or the height of the monitor. If you want to glean even more information about your monitoring system and the effect that the room is having on it, then you can use an additional piece of measurement software. An excellent piece of free software is Room EQ Wizard. And this gives you a number of insights into the frequency response, the kind of the RT60 or the decay within a room. You will need some additional pieces of equipment to get the most out of this. So you'll need an audio interface and a measurement microphone. So ideally you'd be choosing a microphone that is a reference microphone that will have an associated calibration file to ensure that your frequency response of the microphone is as flat as possible. One of the greatest tools with this is it allows you to compare and contrast any changes that you make, and you have the ability to overlay some of the measurements on top of each other. So you can systematically go through, make changes in positioning, and you can also make changes in terms of the filters that you're employing, and you can see the differences that you're making within the frequency response. Double check that with reference material, and then you can kind of make those subjective changes with a little bit more of an insight into what effect the room is having on your monitoring system. And finally, we have automated approaches. And in this context, we're talking about GLM, our Genelec Loudspeaker Management System. So this offers an incredibly precise calibration process that is automated. So regardless of whether we're talking about a stereo system or a system with over 80 loudspeakers, once a system is positioned and set, you can set GLM to calibrate each individual monitor to a single position or to multiple positions within that room. It also allows you to incorporate subwoofer calibration and control into the system, and it complements our loudspeaker design. GLM will never ask a loudspeaker to do kind of more than it's capable of. So it knows what each monitor is capable of in terms of its driver design, its driver makeup. So it will optimize that loudspeaker for that room and for that listening position. We don't have a record or a mix mode, so our latency is incredibly low, so you can track through our system when it's calibrated. And we have control at the end of the chain. So we have the ability to be able to control large arrays of monitors via GLM. Not only is it an incredibly precise means of calibrating a system, it's an excellent monitor controller. We can use this through a physical controller, or we can do this via MIDI. So you can use any desktop controller to be able to control GLM. It's incredibly useful if you're working in immersive formats. Essentially, all you need to do is feed the system audio, and then GLM will take care of the control, the calibration, and get you in a position where you have a highly optimized, precise monitoring situation. So all of the processing and optimization takes place within the loudspeaker. There's no kind of external boxes where anything's saved. Everything can be either stored within the loudspeaker, or it can be run real time. So you've got the ability to control the whole system. And it's an incredibly quick to calibrate these systems as well. You can calibrate a large immersive system in a couple of minutes, and you can be up and running. So it's great if you're traveling to other rooms. You can have an audio reference that travels with you, and all of that control is right at your fingertips via GLM. So the way that the GLM network and the GLM system connects is we'll take a USB connection from our laptop or PC or Mac. You go into the Genelec network adapter, and then from there we will connect via RJ45 cables to each element within the system. So that could be any number of monitors or subwoofers. We have the ability to connect either a physical volume controller, or like I said, you can connect any MIDI-enabled device, and that will be able to take control of GLM. For the calibration process, we'll simply connect our GLM microphone to the network adapter and then position that in the listening position. And then finally, you just need to add an audio source. So you'll notice that the audio runs completely independently of the GLM network. So essentially, all we need to do is feed audio into the system, and then GLM takes control in terms of the overall calibration and level control of the system. Thank you for joining me for this video. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us at support@genelec.com. If you have any specific immersive audio inquiries, then please feel free to contact us at immersive support.helpdesk@genelec.com. And for any general information, head over to genelec.com, where there's a whole raft of videos, downloads related to a lot of the topics that we've discussed in this video. So thank you again for joining me. Take care and see you next time.